All right, in this video, we're going to go over all your car's fluid and the intervals at which you need to replace them just to keep your car up to maintenance and to avoid any damage to components that are carrying that fluid. All right, so we'll start here with number one. So engine oil, that's the most important fluid to change on your car. You'd be surprised how many people don't do that service or just miss out completely. All right, so for intervals, it's going to be 6,000 kilometers, 6K, sorry, or 8,000 kilometers for synthetic. So this is going to be conventional, and this is going to be synthetic, and it's 3,500 miles or 5,000 miles for synthetic. So another way to know that you need an engine oil replacement, it's going to start to turn brown at first, and then it's going to turn black after. And that's how you know you need replacement. But as long as you follow these mileage intervals, you should be good to go. Manufacturers and dealerships and garages will also suggest every 6 months as well. But if you haven't driven your car, like if you haven't reached that mileage in 6 months, then you should get your oil replaced after 6 months. But that's a bit too early, I find. Every year, 1 year, if you haven't reached that mileage, I think it's good enough. So the reason why they say 6 months is, you know, all the dirt or debris is going to start dropping into the pan, and then after you start it after a while, then the pickup tube in the oil pan keeps picking up all that dirt and debris, and then contaminates your bearings and your camshafts and all that. So that's the reason why they tell you to go 6 months, but a lot of people don't follow this one. I mean, let alone follow the mileage interval, the correct interval. But anyway, all right, so 6,000 kilometers or 8,000. If you have GDI, it is recommended to go a bit more aggressive on the oil changes at 5,000 kilometers, because GDI engines have high pressure fuel, and the fuel gets past the piston rings into the oil pan, and then it contaminates the oil. Yeah, it contaminates the engine oil. So that's why they recommend to go a bit more aggressive on the oil change when it comes to GDI engine, just to avoid the contamination of fluid. So if you have a GDI engine and you change your oil, you're gonna sometimes if you go a long time without changing your oil and you drain your oil, you're gonna smell a lot of gasoline. That's because the fuel injectors are contaminating the engine oil, and that's how you know. So to avoid any damage or contamination of the engine oil, just go a bit more aggressive on the engine oil and you should be good to go. All right, next up, number two, we have coolant. So they recommend coolant at 100,000 kilometers or 5 years. Some you'll see like long life coolant at like 10 years, but you know, coolant is 100K is good enough, because at 100K, a lot of shops and garages will recommend to replace your oil pump. So at the same time, you could do a coolant flush with the oil, sorry, not the oil pump, the water pump, sorry. Yeah, so a lot of shops will recommend to do a coolant flush while changing the water pump, because at 100K, usually most water pumps are due, or even a bit sooner at 80K. So if you don't change it at 100K, so you should change it when it gets it starts to change color. So whatever color your fluid, your coolant is in your car, so let's say green, if it starts to fade, so if it's a faded green, then it should be time to change it. Or if it's an orange color, it starts to be a lighter orange, then that it should be time to change it as well. So as well as if it's cloudy, and that's another indication that your coolant needs replacing. And if it's brown or milky, then you have an issue here with oil mixing in with the coolant. So you should check for either a oil cooler being damaged or a head gasket issue where coolant and oil is mixing and getting into your cooling system and contaminating your coolant. All right, so for coolant, 100K, or if it ends up changing color, and you should be good to go. Okay, trans fluid, it's going to be pretty controversial. So a lot of shops will recommend 100K, 100K kilometers, and garage and dealerships will also recommend that. And also manufacturers will also recommend 100K, some a bit earlier at 80K. But if you talk to any transmission shops, those that rebuild transmission, they'll say like 30,000 kilometers to 40,000, and that's like the ideal interval. But you know, a lot of people are not going to do this interval. It's too early. Like they already have the engine oil to take care of, and they could barely maintain that. So you add on a transmission fluid every 30,000, and yeah, you're gonna miss a lot of customers not doing that service. So yeah, especially if you have the CVTs, you should go this interval right away. Really aggressive, 30,000 to 40,000 kilometers, because CVTs are really sensitive to transmission fluid, dirty transmission fluid. So if you do end up changing it at 30,000 with the filters, then you should be good to go, because these CVTs will fail if you have dirty fluid in them. It's almost a guaranteed fail. So you'll see them a lot in the used car market, where you know they're selling it cheap just because the CVT has failed, and nobody really changes the transmission fluid on these. All right, so transmission 100K, 80K, or ideally 30, but you know, I think 80 to 100K is good enough. All right, next up, power steering. Power steering is around 50,000 kilometers. You could push it to 80, just because that system, it's actually under a lot of pressure and heat, plus heat. So it's a good idea to change it just at 50,000 or 80,000, just to keep all the components from contamination. All right, so and you should just flush it out if you have leaks. You should address the leaks first, and then leaks in the lines or the pump or the rack. So always address the leaks first before replacing your power steering fluid. All right, next up we have number 5, brake fluid. So brake fluid is recommended every 2 years, but nobody follows that interval. 2 years is just way too early for it. You could go 80,000 kilometers or 100,000 kilometers for that, but mostly people don't follow a like a mileage interval, so they'll just follow colors. So for dot 3, if it starts to turn brown or blackish, then you know it's time to replace it, because that means it's contaminated, and you could lose braking power if that happens, if it turns brown or black. And I believe for dot 4 or German cars, the brake fluid turns green, and that's how you know you replaced it. Either it's contaminated by moisture or water and so on, and that's why it changes color. I believe that's why. But the reason to change it is just because not to lose any braking power, and not to contaminate the seals that are inside the braking system. All right, next up, washer fluid. So just fill when needed. That's pretty simple. That's the only fluid that you actually use. So if it's missing, then if you have a leak, obviously address it. But if it's missing some, then just top it off. All right, and lastly, we have diff fluid. So diff, what we sold at our shop was, I think, 80,000 kilometers to 100,000 kilometers for diff fluid changes. So either in the transfer case, front diff, and rear diff. So that's what we would recommend to replace. They take gear oil, which is 75W90, something like that, or 85. And these are around $150 to $200 to for a diff fluid, depending on what you're putting in. Some diff fluid will vary a lot in prices, but yeah, it should be just recommended to do it at 80,000 to 100,000 kilometers. They don't take that much quarts, so I think rear diffs could use, I think, 2 bottles, and the transfer case, I think, even 1, and depending on the transfer case. But I've only done a few diff fluid changes. They're really simple, and yeah, you only have to do them at a 100,000 or 80,000 kilometers. I believe if you're hauling a lot of stuff, then they'll recommend to do it a bit sooner, just because the fluid is taking a lot of beating with the heat and the weight. But other than that, if you're not hauling anything, like a lot of people with that own trucks, they just daily drive them, and so you could just follow this interval, 80 to 100,000 kilometers. All right, and yeah, so as you could tell, the engine oil is the most important because of the intervals are a lot shorter than everyone else, just because it's the contamination that comes from the fuel. So fuel contaminates every fluid, so that's why the intervals on the engine oil are a lot shorter, and that's why it's most important to change them, just to get fresh fluid inside the engine, and you know, cut back on the contamination from the fuel. So that's why the other ones, they don't require that aggressive, those aggressive intervals, just because there's no fuel contamination with these. They're all just fluid that takes that goes through heat cycles and weather changes, and then that's basically it. So these intervals are a lot more, are higher up, so 80,000 and more, but it's just the engine oil, just because, like I said, with the fuel. All right, that's going to be it for this short video. Hope you guys find it helpful. Hope you guys find it valuable. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. I'll see you guys in the next one. Take care.